I remember the exact weight of Adrian's hand in mine the night before the surgery, the way his thumb traced absent-minded circles over my knuckles. It felt like an anchor in a rolling sea of fluorescent lights and the sterile scent of antiseptic. He had looked at me then, his eyes clouded with fear, but also with a profound gratitude that seemed to radiate from him, warming the cold hospital room. He whispered that I was his everything, his savior, the beginning and end of his world. I believed him, because why wouldn't I? Believing him was as natural as breathing. But now I wonder, was that gratitude real, or was it just the calculated relief of a man who'd found a solution to a fatal problem? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. The phantom ache in my side is a constant reminder of that belief. It's a dull, pulling sensation, a ghost of the organ I gave away. They tell you the pain will fade, become a memory, but they don't tell you that some pains aren't physical. They don't tell you that the deepest wound isn't the one stitched closed with dissolvable thread, but the one ripped open by the very person you tried to save. My fingers instinctively trace the puckered scar through the thin cotton of my nightgown, a 10-inch line of raised, tender flesh just below my ribs. It feels alien on my own skin, a brand marking me as both a hero and a fool. The skin is still sensitive, still whispers of the scalpel and the violent rearrangement of my insides. It was for him. Every twinge, every sleepless night propped up on pillows, every careful, shuffling step I took around our quiet house was for him. So he could live. So we could live together for another 30 or 40 years. That was the promise, wasn't it? In sickness and in health. I had held up my end of the bargain, literally giving him a piece of myself to prove it. I thought that kind of sacrifice was unbreakable, a bond sealed not with a ring, but with blood and tissue and life itself. I was so wrong. The house feels different now, 2 weeks after I came home from the hospital. The cheerful sunlight that used to pour through the living room windows seems weaker, filtered through a haze of unspoken tension. Adrian is home too, recovering faster than I am, which the doctors said was normal. The recipient always has it easier, they'd explained with clinical smiles. I was happy for him, truly. Seeing the color return to his face, the gray pallor of kidney failure replaced by a healthy flush, was my reward. At first, anyway. Now that healthy glow seems to mock my own slow, painful recovery. He moves through the rooms with a restored energy I can only dream of, while I feel ancient, fragile, a piece of delicate china that might shatter if I move too quickly. The silence is the worst part. We used to fill this house with noise, with laughter, with arguments over what to watch on television, with the soft murmur of conversation late into the night. Now the silence is a living thing. It stretches and breathes in the spaces between us, thick with things I can't understand. This morning, I managed to make my way downstairs by myself, gripping the banister until my knuckles were white. It was a victory. I wanted to share it with him. I found him in the kitchen, staring out the window at the bleak October sky, his back to me. He was dressed, not in the comfortable sweatpants he'd been living in, but in a pressed shirt and dark trousers. He looked like he was going somewhere important. "You're up early," I said, my voice a little hoarse. He didn't turn around. He just shrugged, his shoulders tightening under the crisp fabric of his shirt. "I have things to do." His tone was flat, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice he used with telemarketers, not with his wife. Not with the woman who had a matching scar on her body, a mirror image of his own. A cold knot formed in my stomach, a dread that had nothing to do with post-operative pain. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my own voice light. "Okay. Do you need anything? I could make you some coffee. It would take me ages, and every movement would be agony. But I needed to do something normal. I needed to pretend we were still us." He finally turned, and his eyes swept over me, from my tired face, down to the slippers on my feet. There was no affection in his gaze. There was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger, Don't bother, he said. His voice clipped. I'll get something on the way. He picked up his car keys from the counter, the jangle of metal loud and jarring in the quiet room. Each small sound felt amplified, scraping against my raw nerves. I watched his hand, the same hand that had held mine so tightly in the hospital. It looked different now, strong, capable, and completely detached. What would you have done if the person you sacrificed everything for suddenly looked at you like you were nothing? I felt a sudden, desperate need to bridge this chasm that had opened between us. Adrian, wait, I said, taking a hesitant step forward. A sharp pain shot through my side, and I winced, catching my breath. His eyes flickered down to where my hand was pressed against the wound. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe? Pity? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a chilling impatience. What is it, Clara? I'm late. The use of my full name felt like a slap. He never called me Clara unless he was angry. I wrapped my arms around my waist, a subconscious effort to hold myself together. Are we okay? You've been so quiet lately. Is it the medication? Are you in pain? I was offering him excuses, lifelines to pull him back to the man I knew, the husband I loved. He let out a short, humorless laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Everything's fine, he said, but the words were a lie. I could feel it. The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He walked toward the door, not even glancing back. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the cold kitchen tile beneath my feet. The silence he left behind was heavier than before, filled with the echo of his coldness. I replayed the scene in my head, searching for a reason, a clue to what was happening. Was I too soft? Was I imagining it? Maybe the pain and the medication were making me paranoid. I tried to convince myself of that, but the quiet dread in my gut told me otherwise. Something was broken. Something had shifted in the foundation of our lives while I was under anesthesia, and I was only just beginning to feel the tremors. I spent the rest of the day on the sofa, a heating pad pressed against my aching side, drifting in and out of a restless sleep. When he finally came home, hours after dark, he didn't come over to check on me. He walked straight past the living room, the scent of a woman's perfume trailing faintly in his wake, a scent I didn't recognize. I heard him on the phone in his study, his voice a low, intimate murmur that made the hair on my arms stand up. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone. It was a tone full of the warmth and connection that he no longer used with me. Later, when I was trying to fall asleep, he came into the bedroom. I pretended to be asleep, my breathing even, my eyes shut tight. He moved around the room in the dark, getting ready for bed. I felt the mattress dip as he lay down, the familiar weight of him beside me. But he didn't reach for me. He lay perfectly still, a silent, rigid presence on his side of the bed, a world away. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to him breathe, a terrible thought solidifying in my mind. He had gotten what he needed from me. My purpose was served. The silence from his side of the bed was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an answer. He rolled over, his back to me, and let out a soft sigh, the kind one makes when settling into a comfortable sleep. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had given him a part of my body, and in return, he had taken my entire world and thrown it into darkness. As I lay there, staring into the blackness of our bedroom, I felt the delicate stitches holding my wound together pull tight, and I realized he had just made the first cut in a much deeper, more brutal betrayal. He thought I was just a weak, recovering patient he could discard. But what he didn't know was what I had found in his desk drawer that afternoon, tucked away beneath a stack of old bank statements. Lying there in the dark, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of Adrian's breathing beside me. It was the sound that had lulled me to sleep for 20 years, a sound I once associated with safety and peace. Now it sounded like a countdown. Each exhale felt like a judgment. each inhale a theft of the very air I had fought to give him, because I knew what I had found. It wasn't a love letter from another woman or a secret credit card bill. It was worse. It was a single, crisp sheet of paper, folded in three, tucked into the back of his desk drawer. A life insurance policy. My life insurance policy. The ink was still fresh, the policy dated just 1 week before my surgery, and the beneficiary, the name printed in stark block letters, was not his. It was a name I had never seen before. Isabella Rossi. $1 million policy, payable upon my death. My death, which, according to the fine print, included complications from elective surgery. He hadn't just found a donor, he had arranged a backup plan. Tell me, what would you have done with that piece of paper in your hand? Would you have screamed? Cried? Or would you have done what I did, folding it carefully along its original creases, slipping it back into the darkness of the drawer, the cold reality of it settling like a stone in my gut? The rustle of the paper as I put it back had sounded like a snake shedding its skin. All night, I stared at the ceiling, the shadow of the fan blades turning like the slow, grinding gears of this new, horrific truth. Every memory we had ever made flickered through my mind, now tainted and suspect. Our wedding day, the birth of our children, the quiet evenings spent reading side by side. Was it all a performance? A long, elaborate deception leading to this one, final act where I played the part of the disposable heroine? Was I too soft all these years? Did I build my house on a foundation of lies, too in love to notice the cracks? I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the blinds, striping the bed in gray bars. Adrian was gone. I could hear the shower running, the sound of him starting a new day as if the world hadn't ended the night before. My body ached, a deep, throbbing protest from the wound in my side, but I forced myself to sit up. The pain was a grounding force, a reminder that this was real. I found him in the kitchen again, a perfect replica of the scene from yesterday. He was pouring coffee, his movements fluid and easy. He was humming. The casual, tuneless sound was so grotesque in its normalcy that for a moment I couldn't breathe. He turned, a mug in his hand, and his smile faltered when he saw me standing there. I was holding the folded paper in my hand. "Clara," he said, his voice wary, "you should be in bed." I held up the policy. The paper trembled slightly in my grip. "Who is Isabella Rossi?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was quiet, flat. All the emotion hollowed out of it. He looked at the paper and then back at me. The mask of the concerned husband dissolved. It didn't just crack. It fell away completely, revealing the cold, hard stranger beneath. There was no shock, no denial, not even a flicker of guilt in his eyes. There was only irritation, as if I were a buzzing fly he wanted to swat away. "You went through my desk," he stated, his voice dangerously low. "That's not an answer, Adrian," I said, taking a step closer, ignoring the searing pain in my abdomen. "You took out $1 million policy on my life right before you knew I was going under the knife for you. Who is she?" "She's nobody," he snapped, placing his mug down with a sharp clink against the granite countertop. "It's a business partner, a financial arrangement. You wouldn't understand." The lie was so blatant, so insulting in its simplicity. He didn't even care enough to make it believable. My heart, which I thought had already been shattered, seemed to break all over again. The sound inside my head was like ice cracking over a deep, black lake. "A business partner?" I repeated, my voice finally shaking with a rage that was so cold it burned. "You bet against me, Adrian. You bet against me surviving the surgery to save your life. You were hoping I'd die on that table, weren't you?" He took a step towards me then, his face contorted into a sneer. "Don't be so dramatic. You're fine, aren't you? You're standing right here." "Am I?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "I don't feel fine. I feel like I've been carved up and hollowed out for nothing. For a man who was waiting to cash in my death certificate. The word death hung in the air between us. It was in that moment that he crossed the final line. His face darkened with a fury I had never seen before. "You owe me," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think this was some noble sacrifice? It was your duty as my wife. I gave you a home, a life. This kidney paid your debt." And then he shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a violent, angry thrust, with the heel of his hand against my shoulder. The force of it sent me stumbling backward. My legs tangled, and I fell, my body twisting. The impact wasn't what hurt. It was the landing. A blinding, white-hot agony exploded in my side as the full weight of my body crashed down onto the hard tile floor. The pain was so intense I couldn't even scream. All the air was forced from my lungs in a silent gasp. I felt a horrifying wet warmth spread beneath me, a tearing sensation deep inside where the stitches were. My vision swam with black spots. Through the haze of pain, I saw him standing over me, his face impassive, looking down as if I were a piece of trash he'd just swept to the floor. "Get up," he ordered, his voice like stone. I couldn't move. I could only lie there, clutching my side, the metallic taste of blood and terror in my mouth. "I said, get up," he repeated, his voice rising. He reached down, but not to help me. He grabbed the collar of my robe and hauled me to my feet. The movement sent another wave of sickening pain through me. He dragged me, stumbling and half-conscious, toward the front door. "You're a liability now," he said, his words striking me harder than any physical blow. "The surgery's over. My part is done. Your part is done." He fumbled with the lock, opened the door, and pushed me out into the cold morning air. I was in my thin nightgown, barefoot on the freezing concrete of the porch. The autumn wind cut through the fabric, raising goosebumps on my skin. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the light of the home that was no longer mine. I looked at him, my mind struggling to comprehend the monstrous reality of this moment. "I gave you my kidney. I saved your life." The words were in my head, but I couldn't make them come out. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "The debt is paid, Clara," he said, his voice calm and final. "I don't need you anymore." And with that, he shut the door. The definitive click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the last sound I heard before the world finally went black. I remember Adrian carrying me over the threshold of our first home. His arms were strong around me, and I remember laughing, my head thrown back, as he whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller." The afternoon sun streamed through the empty rooms, promising a future as bright and open as the space we were about to fill with our lives. Our love. That memory feels like a scene from someone else's life now, a faded photograph of a stranger. How does a place that was supposed to be your sanctuary turn into the one place you can never go back to? The first thing I was aware of was the smell. A harsh chemical scent of bleach layered over something stale, like old cigarette smoke. The second was the fabric against my cheek. It wasn't the soft, high thread count cotton of my sheets at home. It was a rough, starchy material that scratched my skin. My eyes fluttered open to a popcorn ceiling, stained with a faint water ring in one corner. A deep, throbbing ache radiated from my side, a familiar beast that had been reawakened with a vengeance. I was in a bed, in a room I didn't recognize. Have you ever felt that dizzying lurch of waking up somewhere you don't belong, with no memory of how you got there? It's a terrifying, untethered feeling. I pushed myself up with my good arm, a groan escaping my lips as fire shot through my abdomen. The room was small and grim. A single bed, a rickety nightstand with a lamp, a bulky television from a bygone era bolted to the wall. The thin beige curtains were drawn, but couldn't block out the drab gray light of an overcast day or the sound of traffic hissing by on a nearby road. A motel. I was in a motel. My gaze fell to the front of my thin cotton nightgown. A dark, ugly stain, stiff with dried blood, had blossomed out from the wound on my side. The sight of it brought everything rushing back in a nauseating wave. Adrian's cold eyes, the life insurance policy, the violent shove, the blinding pain as I hit the floor, the final soul-crushing click of the deadbolt. I had been discarded, thrown out like garbage. A wave of grief so profound washed over me that it was hard to breathe. I wasn't grieving the loss of my home or my comfortable life. I was grieving the death of the man I thought I'd married. The Adrian I loved, the kind, funny, devoted husband, had never existed. He was a phantom, a carefully constructed role played by a monster. The last 20 years of my life were a lie. A long con, with the ultimate punchline being me, bleeding on my own front porch. How did I not see it? The little cruelties I'd dismissed as stress, the emotional distance I'd blamed on his illness, the times he made me feel small and then apologized with flowers. They weren't cracks in a solid foundation. They were the entire structure. I was so busy trying to hold us together, I never realized I was the only one holding anything at all. The logistics of my situation slowly filtered through my shock. I must have blacked out on the porch. A neighbor, maybe old Mrs. Gable, from across the street, must have seen me and called for help. I had a vague, dreamlike memory of flashing lights and a paramedic's kind voice telling me to hold on. They must have taken me to the emergency room, stitched me up again, and then… What? I had no phone, no wallet, no identification. Just a blood-stained nightgown. A hospital social worker must have found this place for me, a temporary shelter for a woman with nothing. I felt utterly erased. Have you ever felt so completely stripped of your own life that you're not even sure who you are anymore? My entire identity had been wrapped up in being Adrian's wife, a caregiver, a partner. Without that, who was Clara Miller? Just a middle-aged woman, with a painful scar and a story no one would ever believe. For a long time, I just sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the peeling veneer of the dresser across the room. The quiet dread was a physical presence, a cold weight pressing down on my chest. I had no one. Our children were grown and lived states away, both closer to their father than to me. My own family was long gone. I had made Adrian my entire world, and he had set it on fire. But then, a tiny spark of something else ignited deep within the ashes. Anger. A slow-burning, righteous fury. He had left me for dead. He had planned to profit from my death. He had taken a piece of my body and then tried to break the rest of me. He thought I would just disappear, fade away in some forgotten motel room. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. The pain in my side was a constant, sharp reminder of his betrayal, but it was also a reminder that I had survived. I had survived the surgery, and I had survived him. I had to get out of here. I had to do something. I didn't have a plan, but the simple act of deciding not to be a victim anymore felt like a victory. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold, slightly sticky linoleum floor. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the pain of standing. Just as I put my weight on my feet, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a sharp, confident, impatient rap, rap, rap that echoed in the small room. My heart leaped into my throat. Who could possibly know I was here? A social worker, maybe? A police officer? I froze, my hand on the nightstand to steady myself. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice raspy and weak. There was no answer. Just another set of knocks, louder this time, more demanding. A sliver of fear pierced through my anger. Adrian. Had he found me? Had he come to finish the job? I shuffled towards the door, my body screaming in protest with every step. I peered through the peephole, but it was clouded with age and grime, showing only a distorted, blurry shape. "I'm not opening the door unless you tell me who you are," I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. A woman's voice, smooth and cold as glass, came from the other side. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. Adrian sent me." The sound of my name, spoken by this stranger, sent a shiver down my spine. With a trembling hand, I undid the chain and turned the lock. The door swung open to reveal a woman who looked as out of place in this run-down motel as a diamond in a dustbin. She was tall and slender, dressed in a sharp, tailored pantsuit that probably cost more than everything I owned. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, perfect bob, and her face, though beautiful, was a mask of cold arrogance. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, swept over my pathetic state: the bloodied nightgown, the bare feet, the pale, drawn face, and a small, cruel smile played on her perfectly painted red lips. I knew who she was before she even said a word. The name from the insurance policy was a brand on my memory. She was Isabella Rossi. I always thought Adrian and I met by chance. A clumsy spill of coffee in a crowded bookstore, his charming apology, my flustered laughter. He told me later it was fate, that the universe had conspired to knock my latte into his hands. I see now that the universe had nothing to do with it. The only thing conspiring that day was him. Have you ever looked back on the single most important moment of your life and realized it was a meticulously staged lie? Isabella Rossi's eyes, the color of dark, polished wood, held no sympathy. They were the eyes of a predator that had finally cornered its prey and was in no hurry to make the kill. She took in the sordid little room, the peeling paint, the stained carpet, and then me, the final pathetic piece of the scene. Her gaze was a physical thing, a weight of judgment that made my bloodied nightgown feel even more shameful. I clutched the thin fabric, a futile attempt to cover the stain, to cover the scar that was the entire reason she was standing here. Adrian doesn't have the stomach for these kinds of endings, she said, her voice a low, condescending purr. She stepped inside, and the cramped room seemed to shrink around her presence. She brought the scent of expensive perfume with her, a floral, musky fragrance that was so out of place here it felt like a violation. It was the same scent I'd smelled on Adrian the night before. He prefers to let other people clean up his messes. She set a sleek black leather briefcase on the grimy dresser, the click of its latches unnaturally loud in the silence. She didn't look at me as she opened it. She was treating me like a piece of furniture, an obstacle to be dealt with before she could move on to more important matters. The sight of her, so poised and powerful while I was so broken, made my anger feel like a tiny, sputtering flame against a hurricane. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. She finally turned her full attention to me, and the smirk I'd seen at the door returned, wider and more contemptuous this time. She pulled a thick sheaf of papers from the briefcase. The top page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage," in bold, unforgiving letters. "I want what's mine," she said simply, "and I'm here to collect." She walked toward me, the crisp legal documents held between two perfectly manicured fingers. I could see the glint of a diamond on her left hand, a massive, brilliant-cut stone that seemed to mock the simple gold band I no longer wore. I instinctively backed away until the backs of my legs hit the lumpy mattress, and I sat down hard, jarring my wound. A sharp gasp of pain escaped me. She didn't even flinch. She simply watched me, her expression unchanging, as if my pain was a boring, predictable part of the transaction. "He feels this is the cleanest way to do it," she continued, her tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "He's been very generous considering. He's not contesting your right to your personal savings, what little there is. The house, of course, is his. Always was." She paused, letting the words sink in. My mind was reeling, trying to catch up. Generous? Cleanest way? It was the language of a business deal, not the end of a 20-year marriage. "You don't understand," I said, shaking my head, a desperate denial rising in my throat. "We're married. I just gave him my kidney." A laugh, a real one this time, burst from her lips. It was a sharp, ugly sound, utterly devoid of humor. "Oh, you poor, stupid woman," she said, the last vestiges of civility gone. "You still don't get it, do you?" She took the final step toward me and stood looming over me where I sat on the bed. "The kidney wasn't part of the marriage. The kidney was the whole point of the marriage." My blood ran cold. The room started to spin, the stained ceiling and the grimy walls blurring at the edges. I could hear a roaring in my ears, drowning out the sound of the traffic outside. "What are you talking about? Adrian needed a kidney 5 years ago. she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were sharing a juicy piece of gossip. His doctors told him the waiting list was a death sentence. His family members weren't matches. His best chance was a living donor, a spouse. The problem was, I wasn't a match. She held up her left hand, wiggling the finger with the diamond ring. We were already together then. We've been together for 8 years. 8 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 8 years of lies. 8 years of stolen moments. Of shared laughter. Of a life I thought was mine, but was just a shadow play. I thought back, my mind racing through a fog of betrayal. 5 years ago. That's when Adrian had suddenly become so distant, so morose. I'd thought it was work stress. Then came the diagnosis, the sudden decline in his health, the desperation. And then me. We hired a private investigator, Isabella continued, her voice relentless. To find a woman, someone healthy, of course. Similar age, same blood type, and ideally, a high compatibility match on all the important antigens. And lonely. Someone who wouldn't have a lot of family asking difficult questions. The investigator found 3 potential candidates in the city. You were the third one he approached. The bookstore. The spilled coffee. It wasn't fate. It was an audition. You were a perfect match, Clara, she said, and the word perfect was laced with a venomous irony. Not just for the kidney, for everything. You were so naive, so eager to be loved. You made it incredibly easy. She smirked as she threw the divorce papers. They didn't fall gently. They scattered across my lap and onto the dirty floor, a cascade of white that sealed my fate. The sharp edge of a page brushed against the back of my hand, a tiny paper cut that was nothing compared to the gaping wound she had just torn open in my soul. And in that moment of absolute devastation, a strange, horrifying clarity washed over me. The pain in my side, the agony of the last few weeks, the confusion and the fear, it all coalesced into one single blinding truth. He had never loved me. Not one moment of it was real. And as I looked at the legal papers that officially erased my life, as I looked at the triumphant face of the woman who had orchestrated my ruin, I wasn't just sad. I wasn't just angry. I was so happy that the fog had finally lifted, that the lie was over, that I could finally see the monster for who he truly was. I looked up at her, my eyes clear for the first time in 2 decades. She was expecting tears. She was expecting me to crumble, but the sight of my calm resolve seemed to unsettle her. She wanted to break me, and she needed to know she had succeeded. He wanted me to give you this, she said, reaching into her coat pocket. It was a small velvet jewelry box. My heart stopped. It was the box that held the simple diamond earrings he'd given me on our first anniversary. She opened it, but the earrings weren't inside. Instead, nestled on the velvet, was a single silver key. It's for a locker at the downtown bus station, she said, her smile returning, sharp and predatory. Consider it a parting gift. Adrian said you'd be curious what he told your children about all of this. He left you a copy of the letter he sent them. A mother raises her children to trust her, to know her heart. But what happens when their father, the man they've looked up to their entire lives, decides to tell them a different story? Whose voice do they choose to believe then? Isabella left, and the scent of her perfume lingered in the stale air, a ghost of her victory. I sat on the edge of that lumpy bed for a long time, the scattered divorce papers a funeral shroud on my lap. The key she'd given me was in my hand. It felt impossibly heavy, its serrated edges digging into my palm. A cold, hard piece of a reality I didn't want to face. My children, Liam and Sophie, the 2 people I had brought into this world, the 2 souls I loved more than my own life. Adrian was using them now. He wasn't content to just take my home, my health, and my dignity. He was coming for my heart. And he was using our children as the weapon. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made my already aching body feel like it was made of lead. A part of me wanted to curl up on that disgusting mattress and simply cease to exist. But another part, The part that had stared into Isabella's triumphant eyes and refused to cry was roaring with a fire I didn't know I possessed. I had to know what he told them. I had to know the battlefield before I could even begin to fight. I found $20 in the pocket of the cheap coat someone had left for me, crumpled and soft from countless folds. It was enough. Getting dressed was an exercise in agony. Every twist, every bend, sent daggers of pain through my side. I had to lean against the wall to pull on a pair of worn trousers and a thin sweater that smelled of dust and disuse. Looking in the cracked mirror over the dresser, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken into dark pools of exhaustion and pain. But there was a hardness in her gaze that was new. The softness of Clara Miller was gone. She had been dissected on an operating table and left to die on a porch. I didn't know who this new woman was yet, but I knew she wouldn't be broken so easily. The bus ride downtown was a journey through a dream. The city slid past the grimy window in a blur of gray buildings and anonymous faces. Everyone was going somewhere, to work, to home, to a life that made sense. I was adrift, a ghost in a city that had once been my own. My hand never left my pocket, my fingers wrapped tightly around the key. The metallic taste of fear was on my tongue, but it was mingled with the iron tang of resolve. The bus station was a cacophony of controlled chaos. Announcements echoed from unseen speakers, the squeal of brakes, and the rumble of engines vibrating through the floor. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fumes and cheap fast food. I moved through the crowds, a solitary island in a river of humanity, my eyes scanning the signs for the locker bay. I found them in a poorly lit corridor, rows upon rows of identical metal doors. C-147. The number was printed on a small plastic tag attached to the key. I found the locker at the very end of the row, near a humming vending machine. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. The touch of the cold metal against my clammy skin sent a shiver through me. With a turn, the lock made a dull, metallic clunk that sounded like a cell door closing. I pulled the small door open. Inside, there was a single, plain white envelope with my name written on the front in Adrian's neat, precise handwriting. Beneath it lay my cell phone. My breath caught in my chest. He had left me my phone. Why? I took them both and found an empty plastic chair in the waiting area, tucking myself into a corner where I felt less exposed. My fingers trembled as I tore open the envelope. The letter was 2 pages long, typed. I started to read, and with every word, I felt another piece of my world turn to ash. He didn't paint himself as a villain. Of course not. He painted himself as a heartbroken husband, forced to make an impossible choice. He wrote of my brave sacrifice and how the trauma of the surgery had tragically unbalanced my mind. He described fabricated episodes of paranoia, of me accusing him of things that were wildly out of character. He mentioned my erratic spending and a new, secretive friendship I'd supposedly formed, hinting at an affair. What do you say to a child who chooses to believe a monster over their own mother? He claimed the divorce was an act of love, a way to protect me from myself and to shield them, the children, from the pain of watching their mother's decline. He had framed his cruelty as compassion. Every sentence was a masterpiece of manipulation, each word a careful, calculated lie designed to sound like love. He ended the letter by begging them not to contact me for a while, to give me space to get the professional help he was arranging. He had not only cut me out of his life, he had built a cage around me with their love and concern, turning my own children into my jailers. I read the last line, and the paper fell from my numb fingers. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. He had thought of everything. He had poisoned the well so completely that even if I reached out, they would see me as a madwoman. I sat there for a long time, the letter a testament to my destruction on the floor beside me. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, I picked up my phone. My hands were slick with a cold sweat as I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. It had been wiped clean. No contacts, no photos, no messages. A blank slate. But as the home screen loaded, a single notification popped up. One new text message. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. The sender was Liam. The message had been delivered 2 days ago, the day after Adrian kicked me out. There were only 9 words. 9 words that drove the final nail into the coffin of the life I once knew. Dad told us everything. We're on his side. Don't call us. He didn't just take my kidney. He took my children. And I let him. That was the confession that echoed in the silent, devastated chambers of my heart as I sat there, the plastic chair cold and unyielding beneath me. I didn't cry. Tears felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, a surrender I refused to give him. The 9 words from my son burned behind my eyes, branded there forever. Don't call us. It was the most profound betrayal yet, a clean, surgical cut that severed the final cord connecting me to my old life. The cacophony of the bus station, the garbled announcements of arrivals and departures, the rumble of rolling suitcases on the grimy floor, the disembodied coughs and conversations of 100 strangers, it all faded into a single meaningless roar. Have you ever felt so alone that even a crowd feels like an empty room? I was an island, and the tide was coming in. The phone in my hand felt both alien and intimately familiar. He had wiped it, scrubbed it clean of 2 decades of memories. No pictures of my children's first day of school. No saved voicemails from my late mother. No silly text exchanges that charted the course of a marriage I now knew to be a lie. It was a calculated cruelty, a final twist of the knife to erase my history, to make me a ghost. Why leave it for me at all? Was it just to deliver Liam's message? Or was it something more? A warning? A tool of control he could still use? A deep primal instinct screamed at me to get up, to move. I couldn't stay here in this brightly lit purgatory, a sitting duck under the hum of the fluorescent lights. A quiet dread began to seep into the edges of my grief. As I scanned the faces in the crowd, a chilling paranoia took hold. Every man in a dark coat looked like he was watching me. Every woman who glanced in my direction seemed to have Isabella's cold, assessing eyes. Was I a fool to think he would just let me go? A woman who knew his darkest secret? The thought sent a jolt of real fear through me. He hadn't just kicked me out. He had placed me in a motel. Isabella had found me with unnerving ease. They weren't just done with me. They were tracking me. I shoved the phone and the letter into the pockets of the thin coat and stood up, my body protesting with a vicious throb from my side. I had to go somewhere quiet, somewhere anonymous, a place where I could think without feeling 1,000 eyes on my back. The public library. The idea came to me like a prayer. It was a sanctuary of silence, a place where no one would look twice at a woman nursing a single cup of vending machine coffee for hours. The walk was only a few blocks, but each step was a battle. The autumn air was sharp, and the wind whipped around the corners of the tall buildings, cutting through my thin sweater. I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the cracks in the pavement, trying to look like I belonged, like I had a purpose other than simply surviving the next 5 minutes. The library was warm and smelled of old paper and floor polish, a scent of quiet dignity that was a balm to my frayed nerves. I found a small carrel in the back, a private little cubicle that felt like a fortress. For the first time in days, I felt like I could take a full, deep breath. I pulled out the phone. I wasn't a technical person, but I knew about the cloud, about digital footprints that could never be truly erased. What was I even looking for? A picture? A message? A single piece of proof that my life wasn't a complete fabrication? I spent what felt like hours navigating the phone's settings, trying to log into old accounts, searching for any digital ghost Adrian might have missed. But he and Isabella had been thorough. Everything was gone. My photo streams were empty. My message backups had been deleted. My contacts were wiped. It was a digital assassination. He had not only erased my past, he had crippled my future, severing my connections to anyone who might have helped me. The quiet dread returned, colder this time. This wasn't just about hiding an affair. This was about control. This was about isolating me so completely that I would have no choice but to vanish. He was boxing me in, and the walls were getting closer with every passing minute. Exhaustion, both physical and emotional, washed over me. The pain in my side had become a constant grinding ache. My head swam from lack of food and sleep. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the carrel, my eyes closing. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was broken. Maybe the best thing to do was to just disappear. As I sat there, teetering on the edge of utter despair, a sound cut through the library's hushed silence. It was the soft scrape of a chair being pulled up to my carrel. My eyes snapped open, my body tensing. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see a security guard telling me I couldn't sleep here. Or worse, one of Adrian's men. It was a woman. She was older than me, perhaps in her early 60s, with a kind, wrinkled face and graying hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. She wore a simple dark wool coat and held a worn copy of a novel in her hands, as if she were just another patron looking for a quiet place to read. She didn't look at me at first. She just sat down, placing her book on the table. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tension. I was about to ask if I could help her when she finally turned her head, and her eyes met mine. They were filled with a mixture of pity and fear. "Carol," I breathed, the name coming to me in a rush. She had been Adrian's executive assistant for over a decade. A quiet, efficient woman I'd always found a bit cold and distant. She had been fired unexpectedly about a year ago. Adrian had told me she'd made a series of costly mistakes. Another lie. Her presence here, now, was impossible. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Hello, Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She leaned closer, her eyes darting nervously around the cavernous room. Her next words were spoken so softly, I had to strain to hear them. A shocking confession that sent a tremor of ice and fire through my veins. "I know what he did," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have the proof. But we have to be very careful. He's having you watched. The man in the brown jacket by the periodicals section? He's been here since you walked in." I had always seen Carol as part of the office furniture, a fixture as reliable and unremarkable as the ficus plant in the lobby. She was a woman of quiet efficiency and starched blouses, her face a professional mask I never thought to look behind. Now, sitting across from me in this hushed library, the mask was gone, and I saw a terror that mirrored my own. How do you learn to trust someone you've spent years misjudging? Her words, "He's been here since you walked in," hung in the air, sucking all the warmth from the room. My blood turned to ice. Every sound in the library became magnified. The soft cough of an old man 2 aisles over, the whisper of a page turning, the low electric hum of the overhead lights. They all sounded like threats. I didn't dare turn my head to look for the man in the brown jacket. The knowledge of his presence was a physical weight on the back of my neck. I could feel his eyes on me, a hunter watching his wounded prey. My entire focus narrowed to Carol, to her hushed voice, to the story that was about to either save me or bury me. "How did you find me?" I whispered, my voice tight and strained. "Adrian isn't the only one who can hire a private investigator," she replied, her own voice a tremor of controlled fear. "When I heard what happened, the ambulance at the house, the rumors he started spreading at the office about your breakdown, I knew he was finishing it. I've been looking for you ever since. I was so afraid he'd already—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. We both knew how this story was supposed to end for me. Her gaze flickered past my shoulder for a fraction of a second, a nervous twitch that sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "We don't have much time," she said, her focus snapping back to me. "He fired me because I found the money trail. I thought it was just embezzlement at first. Large sums being funneled into an offshore account under the name I. Rossi. I confronted him, told him I had to report it." A bitter, regretful smile touched her lips. "I was so naive. I thought it was just about greed." She leaned in closer, the scent of mint on her breath. But it was so much worse. It wasn't just his money he was moving. It was insurance payouts. Adrian's company. It's not what it seems. He finds wealthy, terminally ill clients, people with rare tissue types, and massive life insurance policies. He promises to find them private donors, off the books, for a price. A huge price. My mind struggled to grasp the scale of her words. The roaring in my ears was back, louder this time. "What are you saying?" "He's a broker," she whispered, the word itself sounding obscene. "A broker of human beings. He connects desperate recipients with desperate donors. But the real money, the big prize, is when the donor doesn't make it. Complications during surgery. A tragic accident shortly after. There's a clause in those high-end policies. If a registered organ donor dies within a year of the procedure, the payout is often doubled. It's called a hero's benefit. He found a loophole in life and death. The hidden truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The $1 million policy Isabella held wasn't the main prize. It was just a bonus. My death was meant to trigger a cascade of payouts, a jackpot of blood money for Adrian and his clients. I wasn't just a kidney, I was a financial instrument, a walking, breathing lottery ticket he was waiting to cash in. My purpose was never to save his life, it was to fund his empire with my death. He was going to kill me, I breathed, the realization settling not with a shock, but with a sickening, logical certainty. "It was never supposed to look like murder," she confirmed, her eyes dark with the horror of what she knew. "Just a tragedy. A weak woman, her body rejecting the trauma of surgery. Everyone would have pitied him for his terrible luck. The grieving widower, twice over." She shivered, pulling her wool coat tighter around herself, as if she could ward off the chill of the memory. "When I found the files, the real files detailing the scheme, he threatened my daughter. He showed me pictures of her walking home from school. He told me that some loose ends are better left buried. I was so scared. I let him fire me. I took the severance and I ran." She looked down at her hands, which were trembling on top of her book. "But I couldn't live with it. I made copies of everything before I left. The bank transfers, the client list, the donor profiles. It's all on a hard drive." Her eyes lifted to meet mine again, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of steel beneath her fear. "He ruined my life, Clara. He took my career, my peace of mind, and he was going to take your life. I won't let him get away with it." "Where is it?" I asked, my voice raw. "The hard drive?" She shook her head, her gaze once again darting nervously toward the periodical section. "Not here. It's not safe. He's probably searched my apartment a dozen times. It's somewhere he would never think to look." She began to gather herself, pushing her chair back slightly. The movement was a clear signal. Our time was up. "I have to go. It's too dangerous for us to be seen together for this long. He'll get suspicious." Under the table, out of sight, her hand reached for mine. Her skin was cold and clammy, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She pressed a small folded piece of paper into my palm. "This is a storage unit. It's registered under a false name, my mother's maiden name. Everything is in there, inside a false-bottom suitcase in the back corner." She stood up then, clutching her book to her chest like a shield. She didn't look at me again. She couldn't afford to. She just became another anonymous library patron, walking away, melting back into the quiet stacks. I watched her go, the folded paper a burning coal in my hand. I could feel the man's eyes on me still, a relentless pressure. Carol paused at the end of the aisle, pretending to browse a shelf, and spoke just loud enough for me to hear her final, terrifying warning. "Don't go there unless you're sure you're not being followed. He will kill to keep that buried. Be careful, Clara." I remember Adrian teaching me how to merge onto the freeway. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, terrified of the speeding cars. He put his hand over mine, his touch calm and steady. "Just watch your mirrors, Clara," he'd said, his voice a soothing murmur. "Know what's behind you, and you'll always know when it's safe to make your move." I loved that about him, how he could make the most frightening things feel manageable. Now, sitting in the suffocating silence of the library, his lesson came back to me as a bitter, terrifying irony. I finally knew what was behind me, and it was never, ever going to be safe to make my move. The man in the brown jacket hadn't moved. I could feel his presence without seeing it, a focal point of malevolent stillness in the quiet room. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of grief and shock, suddenly became sharp, diamond hard, with a single, overriding objective: survive. Carol was gone. I was alone with her impossible knowledge and a hunter who was waiting for me to lead him to the prize. I couldn't go back to the motel. I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? That my powerful, respected husband was an organ broker, and my only witness was a disgruntled ex-employee? They would check his records. They would call my children. They would hear I was having a mental breakdown. Adrian had built my cage perfectly. My only way out was through that storage unit. The folded paper in my palm felt as hot as a brand. I had to get to it, but I had to lose the man behind me first. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to quell the frantic hammering of my heart against my ribs. Panicking was a death sentence. I needed a plan. The library was my only advantage. It was a maze of shelves, a warren of quiet corners, and multiple exits. I slowly gathered my things, not looking up, projecting the image of a woman simply done with her reading for the day. I didn't get up. I just sat there, my coat on, the phone and the note secured in my pocket, and I waited. My eyes scanned the reflective surface of the darkened computer monitor in my Carol. In the distorted, blurry reflection, I could just make out a shape, a smudge of brown. He was still there. Patience, Clara. I waited for 5 minutes that stretched into an eternity. Then a group of high school students came in, loud and boisterous, before the librarian shushed them. It was the diversion I needed, as their disruptive energy drew the attention of everyone in the section, including, I prayed, my shadow. I stood up. I didn't walk toward the main entrance. I turned the other way, deeper into the non-fiction stacks, moving with a purpose I did not feel. My side screamed with every step, a hot, pulling agony that I forced myself to ignore. I wound my way through the towering shelves of books, my path a random, nonsensical line. I was a mouse in a maze, and I could only hope the cat was too slow to follow. I glanced down a long aisle and saw a flash of brown pass by the far end, moving toward the main entrance. He thought I was leaving the conventional way. A small surge of adrenaline shot through me. I picked up my pace, heading for a secondary exit I remembered near the children's section. The door was heavy and opened with a loud sigh of hydraulics into a narrow, brick-lined alleyway. For a moment, I was blinded by the sudden gray daylight. The air was cold and smelled of damp garbage. I was out, but I wasn't safe. I didn't run. Running would draw attention. I walked, my pace as brisk as my protesting body would allow, and I didn't look back. I turned the first corner, then the second, losing myself in the city's grid. I boarded a bus, heading in the opposite direction of the storage unit, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat near the back, my eyes fixed on the reflection in the window. At every stop, my breath would catch in my throat. Every man who boarded, every flash of a brown coat, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Do you think I was being too paranoid? Or do you think I wasn't being paranoid enough? After 20 minutes, I got off and immediately boarded another bus on a crosstown route. I did this 3 times, a complicated, painful dance across the city, until I was reasonably sure that no one could have followed my erratic path. It was late afternoon when I finally arrived at the address Carol had given me. It wasn't in a good part of town. Secure Self-Storage was a sprawling complex of corrugated steel and faded blue roll-up doors, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. It looked desolate, forgotten. The office was a small, grimy booth with a bored-looking attendant behind a pane of scratched plexiglass. I gave him the unit number from Carol's note, and he grunted, waving me through a gate that opened with a rusty screech. The air inside the complex was still and cold. The long corridors of identical doors were lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that hummed and buzzed, casting long, distorted shadows. The only sound was the crunch of my own footsteps on the gritty concrete. It felt like a graveyard for secrets. I found the unit. B218. The door was secured with a heavy-duty padlock. The key Carol had slipped me, attached to the note, felt cold and solid in my trembling hand. It slid into the lock, and with a stiff, grinding turn, the mechanism clicked open. I took a deep breath and pulled the heavy door upward. It rattled and groaned in protest, the sound echoing down the empty corridor. The unit was packed with the detritus of a forgotten life. Dusty boxes, furniture draped in white sheets like slumbering ghosts, a child's bicycle with a flat tire. It smelled of dust and mothballs and time. According to Carol, the suitcase was in the back corner. I had to squeeze past a leaning tower of boxes and an old, musty armchair to get to it. The light from the corridor barely reached this far back, plunging the corners into deep shadow. I found it. A large, vintage-looking suitcase made of dark brown leather, tucked behind a standing lamp. It was heavy. My hands closed over the handle, the worn leather cool beneath my fingertips. This was it. The proof. The weapon I could use to fight back. In this dusty, silent tomb, I felt the first fragile flicker of hope. As my fingers tightened around the handle, a sound from the end of the corridor made me freeze. It was a loud, metallic clang, the sound of the main entry gate sliding shut and locking for the night. A moment later, I heard the heavy, deliberate crunch of footsteps on the concrete. They were slow, unhurried. The footsteps of someone who knows their prey is trapped. The footsteps were coming directly toward my open unit. Adrian once told me the key to trapping something wasn't a strong cage, but making it believe it was running to a safe place. He was talking about a mouse that had gotten into the pantry, but the memory, surfacing now in this cold, concrete tomb, was a horrifying revelation of its own. The library wasn't a sanctuary. Carol's note wasn't a lifeline. This storage unit wasn't a haven. It was the bait. It was the cheese at the back of the box, and the door had just snapped shut behind me. The footsteps stopped. The quiet was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sound, even the frantic drumming of my own blood in my ears. He was standing just outside the open doorway of my unit, a dark shape against the weak corridor light. He was waiting, letting the silence do his work for him, letting me marinate in my own terror. My breath hitched, a tiny, betraying sound in the stillness. There was nowhere to run. The main gate was locked. The walls were corrugated steel. This was a dead end. Every instinct screamed at me to hide. I dropped the suitcase handle, the soft thud muffled by the dusty concrete floor. I backed away, deeper into the unit's cluttered darkness. My hip bumped into the sharp corner of a wooden crate, and a jolt of pain, distinct from the gnawing ache in my side, shot up my spine. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, the metallic taste of blood a shocking burst on my tongue. I slid down behind a bulky, sheet-draped armchair, pulling my knees to my chest. The concrete was freezing, the cold seeping through my thin trousers, and every ragged breath I took felt like I was swallowing shards of glass. The sheet smelled of decay and forgotten memories. I pressed my face into the musty fabric, trying to make myself smaller to disappear. A shadow fell across the entrance of the unit, long and distorted. He stepped inside. His shoes crunched softly on the grit, each step a deliberate, unhurried footfall that echoed the slow, steady beat of a funeral drum. I could see his legs from my hiding spot, dark trousers, polished black shoes. He wasn't a thug, he was a professional. He was the man from the library. He didn't search. He just stood there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The throb in my side was a pulsing, rhythmic agony, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. Please don't see me. Please just take the suitcase and go. The suitcase is the only reason you're still alive. Clara, he said. His voice was calm, conversational, utterly devoid of emotion. It was the chillingly neutral tone of a man discussing a business transaction. He knew I was here. He'd known all along. He wants it back, and he wants to make sure the information on it never sees the light of day. You understand? He took another step into the unit, his silhouette now blocking most of the light from the corridor. His face, which I had only seen in a blurry reflection, was brutally ordinary. He could have been anyone, an accountant, a teacher, a neighbor. It was his eyes that were different. They were empty. Adrian sends his regards, he added, as if it were an afterthought. My body was slick with a cold sweat. This was it, the end of the line. A quiet, anonymous death in a dusty storage unit, my body to be found weeks, maybe months, later. No. A flare of pure, defiant rage cut through my fear. I had been carved up, discarded, and hunted. I had lost my home, my husband, my children. I would not lose my life in this forgotten place. I would not be another one of Adrian's tragic accidents. My hand, fumbling in the darkness behind me, brushed against something hard and metallic, the base of the old standing lamp I'd seen earlier. My fingers wrapped around its thin, cold stem. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. He took another step, his shadow falling directly over me. He knew exactly where I was. He was toying with me. Just give me the hard drive, he said, and I'll make it quick. You won't feel a thing. That was when I moved. With a guttural scream that was torn from the deepest part of my soul, I surged upward, swinging the heavy lamp base with all the strength I possessed. It was a clumsy, desperate arc, powered by pure adrenaline. He was taken by surprise, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second. The heavy iron base connected with the side of his head, with a sickening, hollow thud. He staggered back with a grunt of pain, his hand flying to his temple. He didn't fall, but he was stunned. It was my only chance. I didn't run for the corridor. I lunged for the suitcase, my fingers closing around the handle. He was already shaking his head, clearing it, his empty eyes now blazing with a murderous rage. I hauled the suitcase, its weight a dead anchor, and scrambled out of the unit and into the dim, buzzing light of the corridor. "You stupid woman!" he roared, his voice no longer calm. He was coming after me. I ran. It was a clumsy, hobbling gait, my body on fire, every step a fresh wave of agony from the tearing wound in my side. I was dragging the heavy suitcase behind me, the sound of it scraping and bumping on the concrete, a frantic counterpoint to my ragged gasps for air. I could hear his footsteps right behind me, faster now, closing the distance. The main gate was 100 feet away, a locked grid of steel and barbed wire. I was trapped. I wasn't going to make it. He was almost on me. I could hear his breathing, a harsh, ragged sound of exertion and fury. I braced myself for the impact of his hand on my shoulder, for the final, brutal end. Suddenly, a brilliant, blinding light flooded the corridor, washing out the shadows and making me throw a hand up to shield my eyes. The squeal of tires on asphalt echoed between the steel walls. A dark SUV had screeched to a halt just outside the gate, its headlights pointed directly at us, two piercing beams of salvation. The man froze, caught in the glare like a nocturnal animal. A car door slammed shut. A voice, sharp with an urgency I never thought she possessed, cut through the darkness. "Clara, get in!" It was Carol. She was standing by the open passenger door, a heavy set of bolt cutters in her hands. She wasn't running. She was fighting back. My husband's final betrayal wasn't the shove that sent me crashing to the floor, or the divorce papers thrown in my face by his mistress. It was his profound, arrogant miscalculation. He was so certain he had broken me, so sure I was just a discarded piece of a puzzle he had already solved. He never imagined that a broken thing could reassemble itself into a weapon. The headlights of Carol's SUV pinned the man in their glare, a deer caught on a road it never expected. The moment of his hesitation was my entire world. I didn't wait. I scrambled toward the blinding light, dragging the heavy suitcase, my body a symphony of agony. Carol was already working, her arms straining, the thick steel jaws of the bolt cutters biting into the chain on the gate. The man behind me roared, a sound of pure rage, and started running again. The cold metal of the bolt cutters felt shockingly real in my hands as Carol thrust them at me. "Hold them steady!" she yelled, her voice tight with exertion as she positioned them again on another link. I gripped the tool, the vibration of the straining metal traveling up my arms. The man was closing in. I could hear his ragged breaths just a few feet away. There was a loud, final, metallic snap, the sound of a cage breaking. The chain fell away. Carol yanked the gate open just enough for me to stumble through, and I collapsed into the passenger seat, hauling the suitcase in after me. She was in the driver's side a second later, slamming the door as the man's hand slapped against the window, his face a contorted mask of fury. The tires screamed as Carol floored the accelerator, leaving him and the graveyard of secrets behind in a cloud of dust and exhaust. We drove in silence for several minutes, the city lights a dizzying, beautiful blur. I was trembling, not from cold, but from the violent aftermath of adrenaline. My hand rested on the leather suitcase on the seat between us. It didn't look like much, this small repository of files and numbers, but it was a black box recorder for a lifetime of lies. "He knew," I breathed, my voice hoarse. "He knew we'd go there." Carol nodded, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I was afraid of that. That's why I didn't go in. I parked a block away and watched. When I saw his man follow you in the gate lock, I knew it was a trap." She had saved my life. This quiet woman I had barely known, this stranger bound to me by a shared enemy, had risked everything to save my life. I looked at her, at the determined set of her jaw in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude that was so pure it almost hurt. "Where are we going?" I asked, assuming the answer was the police. She shook her head. "Not yet. Showing up at a police station in the middle of the night with a wild story and a stolen hard drive? Adrian's lawyers would have it buried by morning, and us charged with theft. We have one shot at this, Clara. We have to make it count. We have to detonate it in a place he can't control." I didn't understand, but I trusted her. For 20 years, I had put my faith in a man who used it to hollow me out. Now I was placing it in the hands of a woman I barely knew, and it felt like the sanest thing I had ever done. We ended up at an all-night diner, a small pocket of light and warmth against the dark, sleeping city. Over bitter coffee, Carol opened her laptop and inserted the hard drive. For the next hour, she showed me everything. The names, the dates, the offshore accounts. There were at least 5 other donors like me. 2 of them were dead. Complications, the record said. Both had triggered massive heroes benefit insurance payouts that had been funneled through a series of shell corporations back to Adrian's clients, with him taking a hefty commission. It was a factory of death disguised as a business of life. Carol had already done the work. She had compiled everything into a single encrypted file. With a few clicks, she attached it to an email. "There's an investigative journalist," she explained. "Max Freeman. He's famously relentless. Adrian ruined his father's company years ago. Max has been waiting for a chance to get his own justice." She hit send. Then she looked at me, her expression grim. "The email is a dead man's switch. If Max doesn't hear from me by noon tomorrow, he publishes everything. But now, we go to the main event." 40 minutes later, we were parked across the street from the city's most opulent hotel. A grand charity gala was underway, the kind of event Adrian loved, where the city's elite gathered to congratulate each other on their generosity. A massive banner over the entrance read, "Honoring Adrian Miller, our city's philanthropist of the year." He was on stage, bathed in a golden light, accepting an award. He looked handsome, powerful, a wolf in a shepherd's clothing, accepting applause for his magnificent fleece. Isabella was at a front table, looking up at him with adoration, the perfect picture of a supportive partner. My children were not there. For that, I was eternally grateful. We didn't go inside. We just sat in the car and waited. At precisely 11:30 p.m., Carol's phone buzzed. It was a text from Max Freeman. It just said, "Live." On the giant screens on either side of the stage, Adrian's smiling face suddenly vanished, replaced by a bank statement. An account in the Cayman Islands, under the name I, Rossi. Then a donor profile, a picture of a smiling young man, followed by a copy of his death certificate. Then another, and another. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Adrian froze, his hand still holding the award, his charming smile melting into a mask of pure panic. I saw Isabella's face, the color draining from it, her mask of arrogance crumbling into dust. The journalist, Max, stood up from a table near the back, his voice amplified by a microphone he must have brought with him. "Mr. Miller," he called out, his voice ringing with cold fury, "can you tell us about the hero's benefit you collected on Mark Renshaw, your kidney donor who died in a hit-and-run just 6 months after his surgery?" The silence in that grand ballroom was more profound than any scream. It was the sound of a monster being unmasked in front of the entire world. Adrian stood there, trapped in the spotlight, his empire of lies collapsing around him in real time. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then, the police, alerted by Freeman, streamed in through the main doors. It was over. I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of revenge I thought I would. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of release. I had survived. The lie was dead. I thought back to that night in the hospital, his hand holding mine, his words promising me a future. He had told me I was his savior, but in the end, I didn't need to save him. I needed to save myself, and I had. The deepest betrayals don't always come from a place of hate, but from a place of absolute indifference. To Adrian, I was never a person. I was a solution to a problem. The moral of my story is this: sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to finally see what you truly need. You cannot build your life inside another person's heart, because when they leave, they take your home with them. You must build your home inside yourself. What's the biggest lie you've ever escaped from? Let me know in the comments below.